moving beyond the current paradigm in psychiatry. I am a founding member of the Critical Psychiatry Network, formed in Bradford in 1999. The network exists to develop a critique of the contemporary psychiatric system. CPN covers a broad range of views, and it may be difficult to distill the essence of its position. Essentially, it argues that diagnosis is about understanding the person and not identifying a single word brain disease. It also believes that the evidence for treatment interventions such as psychotropic medication and psychological therapy is biased in their favour. In December last year, we managed to get a special article published in the British Journal of Psychiatry entitled "Psychiatry Beyond the Current Paradigm." This was in response to several previous editorials promoting what has been called a remedicalised psychiatry. To quote from the abstract to the article, a series of editorials in this journal have argued that psychiatry is in the midst of a crisis. The various solutions proposed would all involve the strengthening of psychiatry's identity as essentially applied neuroscience. Although not discounting the importance of the brain sciences and psychopharmacology, we argue that psychiatry needs to move beyond the dominance of the current technological paradigm. This would be more in keeping with the evidence about how positive outcomes are achieved, and could also serve to foster more meaningful collaboration with the growing service user movement. The primary concern for a remedicalised psychiatry has been that psychiatrists are fearful that their role may be taken over by non-medical professionals. This has led to the defensive position that psychiatrists should concentrate on what doctors do best, which are medical things like diagnosing and treating brain disease. Essentially, what is being argued for is a brain-based medicine of the mind. This position actually isn't new, but has been reinforced by the current situation in UK psychiatry, which I will explain a bit more about. He made clear that he would not have contemplated becoming a psychiatrist if psychiatry had been a branch of neurology. His position is broader than the more restrictive remedicalised psychiatry. The policy that has created this response from psychiatrists is what was called new ways of working. This was actually not new for some psychiatrists and was about encouraging interdisciplinary working. However, in this there was an implicit acknowledgement that doctors don't have a natural entitlement to a unique place in mental health care. Their leadership role needs to be earned rather than assumed. Some doctors may have seen this as threatening. Alongside this, mental health services were so-called modernised by the development of specialist teams such as assertive outreach, crisis resolution and early intervention in psychosis. These developments were centrally directed and not necessarily seen as clinically led by psychiatrists. So it's understandable that psychiatrists may have felt undermined by these developments. But there were also genuine problems with new ways. Firstly, there was a deprofessionalisation of the role of all mental health practitioners, not just psychiatrists. The value of clinical skills and judgment may have been undermined by the systematic implementation of managerial directed interventions. Secondly, the increasing specialisation has led to a fragmentation of services. This may not be a problem if there is good communication between the different parts of the service, but what causes concern is a loss of continuity of care, which was traditionally provided by the psychiatrist. However, a reaction against new ways does not justify a remedicalised psychiatry. And anyway, mental health policy has now moved on. The main problem with a remedicalised psychiatry is that it may imply that psychiatry is unconcerned about the psychosocial dimension, whereas in fact the personal should be seen as the primary element of mental health practice. Psychiatric practice is obviously determined by values. There is an inevitable ethical dimension to society intervening to control mental disturbance. We shouldn't be surprised by that. In fact, despite focusing on the body, values are also important in the rest of medicine. It's just that they may be more hidden. However, there is an inevitable central focus on the person through responding to patients' complaints and symptoms. We should actually welcome other professionals taking on consultant roles, if they want to. For example, by prescribing medication or becoming approved clinicians under the Mental Health Act. Non-medical professionals taking more responsibility is happening in other areas of medicine besides psychiatry. It offers more choice to a patient to be able to see a consultant from another profession, such as nursing or clinical psychology. And anyway, non-medical professionals already have a central role in hospital care and care coordination in the community. I'm not saying that medical training is of no value for psychiatry. This is because many physical complaints have a psychogenic origin. However, none of this justifies a retreat into a remedicalised psychiatry. And even more patient-centred medical training is indispensable in modern mental health practice. Two other arguments are used to support a remedicalised psychiatry. Firstly, it's said that it reduces stigma, as mental illness is not your fault if it's a biological illness, just like having a high blood pressure, diabetes, or cancer. But such a position could actually increase stigma rather than decrease it by encouraging a social distance from people identified as physically damaged. Secondly, it's argued that recruitment into psychiatry will be improved by exciting trainees into understanding the pathological basis of mental illness. The danger of this point of view is that too many young psychiatrists will become disillusioned, as the myth of biomedical causes becomes apparent to them over time, however unconsciously. Actually, young psychiatrists are more likely to be attracted to a critical approach. In the words of Aubrey Lewis from the 1950s, psychiatry needs to attract ardent, critical, lively, disputatious and reflective, eager minds. There are barriers to changing the dominance of the biomedical model in psychiatry. This is because of the response to two main conceptual issues, although they're not totally mutually exclusive. Firstly, the mind-body problem, and secondly, the application of the scientific method to the study of human nature. The framework adopted depends on how these conceptual issues are understood. So, as far as the mind-body problem is concerned, one can either argue for the integration of brain-mind, or that the brain is the cause of mental illness. The latter is the position of remedicalised psychiatry, but there is an alternative. Similarly, science can be understood to include the study of the person, or neuroscience can be seen as the only scientific method. Again, the latter is the position of remedicalised psychiatry, but there is, as previously, an alternative. Taking the remedicalised psychiatry solution means that the uncertainty of human action does not need to be embraced. This is seen as its advantage, as it avoids the complexity of metaphysics. Dealing with disturbed people is not easy. The temptation is to retreat into an objectification of those identified as mentally ill. I don't want to be misunderstood. Of course, I'm not saying that mental illness has nothing to do with the brain. In fact, it's tautologists to say that mental illness is due to the brain. This is the same as for our normal thinking, feeling and behaviour. However, it's very different to view mental illness as a functional abnormality rather than an organic brain abnormality, as does remedicalised psychiatry. So, in conclusion, modern psychiatry is a faith believing that mental illness is a brain disease. It's not easy to challenge the aura of factuality created by this position, but we do need to do so to create a more open practice in mental health. Thank you very much.